Well, I guess we were thrilled when we learned that Lindsay and Trent were going to have a baby. This was to be our first grandchild. They had been married for 3 or 4 years, and we knew it was coming, but they had everything perfect in their world. They both had master's degrees. They both had good jobs. They had bought a house. They thought everything was just right to start their little family, and we were thrilled to death. It was at Christmas time that we found out that the baby was coming. So I ran straight down to the store and I wanted to get a little Christmas stocking to hang on the mantle with the rest of the family's Christmas stockings. And all I could find, because I went to the wrong store or something, was a little pair of baby socks, little red fuzzy baby socks. So that's what I brought. I brought a pair of socks home, and I kept one and Lindsay kept one. And those are still with us today. You want to say something?
Sure. I mean, we've kind of fast forwarded to the Christmas stocking thing, but we were both obviously very excited. This being our first grandchild, and of course Lindsay always being our little girl, if you will. So we were very excited for her, and even though we were saying we were way too young to be grandparents, we were tickled to death to start that new chapter of our lives. So yeah, then fast forward, we felt like everything was going smooth.
It was perfect. It was a perfect pregnancy, and as a health professional herself, Lindsay was very diligent in making sure that everything was just right, that she didn't break the rules. She's our firstborn rule follower, and she didn't break any rules, and she as a nurse and a nurse practitioner, she knew where the dangers were, and she thought she was well prepared to take care of this unborn baby. Everything was perfect. Everything was going to be wonderful. And then she woke up in the middle of the night one night with just a terrible, ominous feeling that something was wrong. Something that still to this day she can't describe very well. Just something in the gut pit of her stomach just said, something's not right. And they wrestled with it, because she had always said she didn't want to be that nurse or that patient that was constantly asking questions, and she was going to be this real compliant patient. And so she wrestled with this feeling for several hours, and finally by morning they decided to call the doctor, who said to come in, and the rest is history. They checked her over, and there was no longer a heartbeat at 37 weeks. No explanation, no warning, just no heartbeat. We lived in Minnesota, and she lived in Colorado at the time, and I had been driving down to spend the last couple weeks with her before the baby came. And I was actually at Steve's parents' house when she called me at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the words are in my head as clear now as they were that day. She's sobbing, and she just says, "Mom, there's no heartbeat." And I said, "What do you mean there's no heartbeat? What are you doing? Where are you? And why are you calling me with this?" And so the story went on. Steve was in Canada working, and I had a hard time getting a hold of him. Finally, I called his office, and I said, I can't keep trying to find him, call him. And so they found him, and I jumped in the car. I had 200 more miles to drive to get to Denver to her house that day. And I drove, I think I was driving carefully. I don't know, probably not. But I screamed at God the whole trip. I was hurt. I was angry. I was in disbelief. I was in shock. But me and God had a little conversation that I think He's forgiven me for now. But I was not happy. And by the time I got there, I was pretty well screamed out and emotionally exhausted. But
yeah, 11 years later, it still hurts.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Got there, and Lindsay's brother lived in the same town where she was, and so he was there with her by the time I got there, and I walked in and everybody was just staring at the walls, and I expected some sort of reaction out of everybody, but it was like everybody was just frozen in time, not knowing what to think, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say to each other, and I didn't even know the questions to ask. I didn't, what's going to happen? What do we do? How? Are you sure? That kept going through my mind. Are you sure? Let's go back and see. Are you sure? Can they, let's, and of course, Lindsay, no, mom, we're sure. And so later that afternoon, they admitted her to the hospital and started an induction, which didn't go real quickly. That night, it was towards evening, and all of us were there. Our son-in-law's parents were there, and our son was with us, and they came in towards evening. It was, I don't know, maybe 8 o'clock at night or so, and the nurse came in and she says, we think we're just going to turn the Pitocin off for the night and let you get a good night's sleep, and we'll start again in the morning. And I looked at Lindsay, and the color just drained out of her face, and I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but then the nurse left, and she said, Mom, my doctor doesn't want to be bothered to come deliver a dead baby. And so what we've learned over the years is that we tell healthcare professionals that it's not what you say sometimes, it's how you say it and how it's perceived, because people in shock don't hear things the same way as what you think they do. And what she heard was, my doctor can't be bothered to come in the middle of the night and deliver a dead baby. And that still to this day haunts her. We've had those conversations with the healthcare professionals, and it's an aha moment for them. But she did get a good night's sleep. They gave her plenty of sleeping pills. It absolutely knocked her out. We all went home, came back the next morning, and it was a few hours by, I don't know, he was born at 11 something, maybe something like that. And we were sitting in the lobby with everything else that goes on in a labor and delivery unit. All of the other families that were bringing in balloons, all of the other moms. It was kind of a busy time in this unit. They were all leaving the hospital with their little bundles of joy. And we were all just sitting there, and it was very painful to see this. And the hospital there would play a little lullaby every time a baby was born, and it was a busy time at the hospital. And so every time that lullaby would go off, it was like somebody stabbed us in the hearts. And so when Garrett was born, and Trent came out and he told us, we didn't know it was a boy. He came out and told us that he had a son. And he sobbed, and his parents sobbed, we all sobbed, and the nurse happened to come out right behind him, and I said, how come you haven't played the lullaby? And she said, well, I didn't know if it was appropriate or not, and I said, yes, it is. I want you to go play that lullaby for Garrett. So they did, and I don't know that it felt any better, but it just felt like, his little life meant as much as everybody else. From that point on, our hospital experience wasn't great, I don't think, as grandparents.
I think the staff was great. They really were. The two nurses in particular, they became very caring, and they understood the hurt, but it's just the overall policy and the way they normally handle things that they're not used to doing that every day, obviously. So
at one point she came out and
you can't blame the people involved.
No, I don't blame the people. They don't get the training they need, and that's part of why we do what we do. At one point someone came out and said, would you like to see the baby? And of course we said yes, we would, and we thought we would be going into the room where Lindsay and Trent were, and that we would have that time as a family. So there was 8 or 10 of us or so, and she said, well, follow me, and we were like these little ducks following Mama Duck down the hall, and she goes right past Lindsay's room and takes us clear to the far end of the hallway and says, come on in here. And it was the storage room for the labor and delivery unit that had all the extra bassinets and the rocking chairs and the IV poles and all of the extra supplies in that room. And we kind of wiggled our way through all of this stuff. And back in the corner is this huge industrial sink. And right beside it is the bassinet, and Garrett's there. That was not a feel-good moment because it felt like he was just extra baggage, and that he couldn't be out where anybody might see him or something. It felt like he was being sequestered. And then we stood there and we just looked at him, and the nurse just kind of stood back in the corner, and finally I said, or I didn't say anything, I just reached over to pick him up, and the nurse goes, oh, don't. And I said, I've raised babies. I know how to. And she said, well, when a baby dies, they kind of. And I said, this is my grandson. And I picked him up. And so then she grabbed him out of my arms and she said, well, wait, let me help you. And she put him back in the bassinet, and she ran over and got a humongous rocking chair and sat it down and said, there, sit there. And then she picked him up and put him in my arms. It was like I couldn't be trusted to hold my own grandson. And so that was not a feel-good experience then either. And so then, I don't know, just being the bull in the china closet that I can be, I just kind of took control, and we passed him around. And I don't think we were in that room more than 20 minutes, were we?
Yeah, maybe a half hour or something like that, yeah.
And then we felt like we should leave.
Imposing.
Yeah, we felt like we were imposing, and so we left. And I thought maybe Lindsay and Trent had said that it would be too painful for them to have us see him for the first time with them in the room. And later in conversations, they had no idea that she even came and got us. They didn't know that was going on. I guess when babies are born into families, whether it's a living baby or a tragic situation, this is a family experience. It's not just something that happens to a patient. This is a family experience, and that needs to be taken into consideration better. This was our first experience with this. I remember, generationally, I remember when we were having our children, a couple of friends that had stillborn babies, and my own reaction at that time, I'm very ashamed of now. It was, well, something must have been wrong with the baby, or at least they didn't know this baby, or they'll have more. And now I'm very ashamed of those attitudes. But back then, people didn't talk about it. They didn't share those moments.
And as a maybe the male figure, but certainly as a father and a grandfather, feel like we need to be the protector. And it was tough, knowing that there wasn't anything that we could do to change things that day. And fast forward, probably the frustrating part for us today is there's so many technologies that are available in everything we do, everyday life. And if we think just about babies in particular, or traveling with our kids, a seatbelt when our kids were little was this. You go to step on the brakes and you do this. You hold your child in the seat. We didn't have car seats. Those same technologies, or that level of technology, has improved in medicine, certainly. And there's so many things that we believe could be changed in helping take care of these babies.
I am of the personal opinion that the problem is not so much clinical. I think we have the technology, we have the brilliant people. I think our society is too afraid of the lawsuit, is too worried about what it's going to cost. So in my opinion, it comes down to political, financial, and legal barriers that are causing us not to be able to save more of these babies. I think if we could eliminate those factors from the equation and just do whatever we need to do to make sure that baby isn't at risk, the unborn baby isn't in danger, mom isn't in danger, and take advantage of all of the technology that's already there. We don't have to reinvent any wheels. We don't have to come up with the new penicillin to make this work. so that these babies can live. We just need to eliminate the political, financial, and legal barriers that are there. Now, that won't save every baby, because there's certainly situations that are difficult beyond those barriers. But I know that Garrett,
in our case, we could have.
Yeah, I know that Garrett and many other families could have saved their babies if the technology had been applied.
Well, yeah, and applied is the key word, because it's certainly there, and something probably as simple as an extra ultrasound at 30 weeks or at 32 or 35, whatever that magical number is. But why not every 2 or 3 weeks, like they did in subsequent pregnancies with our daughter, because then she was considered high risk. And it's not fair that every mother, whether it's her first child or their 10th, isn't considered high risk.
Yeah. That it's very frustrating that, and Lindsay says this all the time, that she paid the price of the life of her first son to be entitled to everything that obstetrical medicine could offer her. The care she received in her 3 subsequent pregnancies was significantly different, and all 3 of those pregnancies had issues that, had it not been for the stepped up level of care she got, could have turned out tragic as well. I believe that her 3 children that she has, her 3 living children, are here because she had the high risk care, and those issues were subtle enough, just like Garrett's, that they would not have been noticed.
Yeah, and the statistics certainly would, they're skewed in the fact that many second pregnancies, or especially after a loss, are handled much differently. So in a way, I guess that's fortunate, but the unfortunate part is those 26,000 a year could still be, at least a few of them, if we save one, that's great, but if we could save 50% of those, would be fantastic. But if we didn't have the special care in those second and subsequent pregnancies, that number could easily be 50,000. So it's just a shame, that we have to sacrifice that many babies to learn these lessons.
It's the role of the grandparent is there's a duality to the grief that I was not prepared for. I was heartsick that we weren't going to be having a grandchild to bring home, but I think maybe even harder than that, even to this day, is the grief that we watched our own children suffer. Yeah. The pain and the anguish, and this wasn't a boo-boo I could kiss away or put a Band-Aid on. It was so gut-wrenching to watch Lindsay in particular, and of course our son-in-law, but even our son was so devastated by this. And all we could do was just hold each other. There wasn't anything that we could do. And to watch your children plan a funeral for a tiny baby, and then to, nobody should bury their children, but when you're planning to bring a baby home and you've just had all the baby showers and you've had all the decorating and we spent hours decorating the nursery and making quilts and all the exciting things you do when you're planning a baby,
and buying footballs.
Yeah, all the fun things that you look forward to, and then you plan a funeral. You have to plan a funeral, and you go home and you shut the door to the nursery, and you don't know whether you should go in there or not. And then the mama bear in me came out. I would go, well, Lindsay didn't want to be seen in public because she was so afraid that people were going to blame her. The guilt that comes with this by these moms is intense. And they can't help it. Everybody tells them it wasn't your fault, but they can't help it. And I remember Lindsay saying, it was between me and God to keep this baby safe, and one of us screwed up. And it shook her faith for a long, long time. But more than that, she blamed herself, because as an educated healthcare professional, she thought she should have done a better job. But just as Garrett's mom, she really blamed herself too. And so when I could get her out of the house, I stayed with her for weeks. And when I could get her out of the house, we'd go to Target or the grocery store or any place, and I'd see a pregnant woman off in the distance, and I would just kind of shepherd her around. The mama bear in me came out. I didn't want anybody else to hurt her anymore. And I knew that seeing other pregnant women, and I knew that that going down the baby aisle in Target was painful. And I worried so much about how she was going to go back to work. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner. How in the world was she going to go back and take care of other people's babies? And yet I knew that they needed her income too. And she, from a career standpoint, she needed to be able to stay with that. But that was probably the best thing that happened out of it was her clinic. The docs in her clinic were extremely supportive, and they arranged that her patient load would not be any child younger than 5 years old or school-age children, which helped her to avoid seeing the tiny babies and doing the well-child checks. But it didn't stop her families from saying, "Oh my gosh, you had your baby," and then having to explain over and over and over. And her very first patient, she thought, she tells the story, and it just really stuck in my head. Her very first patient, her very first day back to work, her assistant checked the family in and everything, and she looked at the chart and she said, "Oh, sore throat, earache, I can do this. I have done sore throat, earache forever and ever. I can do this." So she went in and she said she put her stethoscope, talked to the family a little bit, put her stethoscope on the little child's chest, must have been a 5-6-year-old child, on his chest, and she said she happened to look down at the chart that was sitting right on the stool beside her, and the child's name was Garrett. And she just dissolved to tears and had to leave the room. And she said she got to the hallway and just fell to a puddle on the floor. And so even when you think you're prepared and you think you can go back to normal life, life throws you curveballs, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and I still try to mother bear her. I still try to protect her from things. So.
What kind of support did you get when your friends and your family found out?
You know, it was. We had a great circle of friends, but I think the attention, and rightfully so, was focused on Lindsay and Trent, and so we were trying to be strong. As you can tell, I'm not a very strong person
When it comes to this topic,
emotionally, but you know, they were very supportive. But again, it's until you've lived it, it's hard to even say how it affects you.
Yeah, there was a lot of sympathy. Steve's mother was very heartbroken. His sister was wonderful. My sisters were wonderful, and I would say within that they felt the pain and the anguish much in the same way that we did. Beyond that, everybody else saw it as a tragedy, but they didn't feel it as a tragedy, I don't think.
Yeah.
They were sympathetic for a while, and I think that some of our friends even today, because we're still so involved in the topic after 11 years, I think they wonder about us sometimes why we're still if we're just hanging on to the grief. But no, we're hanging on to the passion that something has to be done to save these babies. Yeah. We have to save these babies. It's not so much about the grief, I don't think. It's that we believe that something has to be done.
Yeah, it'd be really difficult to just try to even say that we're going to try to put it out of our mind, because first of all, you can't, and second of all, we're trying to make something positive out of it. And again, by supporting the Star Legacy Foundation is basically to say we're trying to make something positive out of our loss, out of Lindsay's loss, and out of our family loss.
And he lives on in our family. His two brothers, his younger brothers, and his little sister all know about him. He's very much part of their life. They make birthday cupcakes on his birthday every year. They make several trips to the cemetery. We always take pictures. We planted an oak tree in their yard. They take pictures with the oak tree every year.
And of course, the foundation is a big part. I think he's the inspiration and keeps us going sometimes when we think we ought to just throw up our hands and quit. But
So, similar to the rocks that were laid by the oak tree yesterday. Each year on Memorial Day, we take a rose bush to the cemetery, leave it there through Memorial Day, and pick it up and bring it home and plant it in our rose garden.
so we've got a nice rose garden at home. Those are Garrett's roses, but support-wise, people don't understand it. People are caring, but they're not. They don't get it unless you've walked in the shoes. You don't get it, and other parents don't get it. It's
And nobody does it to be mean at all.
Uh-uh.
At least I don't believe that. But people just don't understand what to say and even how much it hurts.
It makes some people. I've got Garrett's picture on the shelf in the living room, just like all the other grandchildren. We've been blessed with 5 more grandchildren since Garrett was born. They're all on the mantle, sitting on the mantle, and I know that it makes some people uncomfortable that he's there, but I don't really care. He is part of our family and always will be. We still hang that little red Christmas stocking every year. It gets hung with the rest. And Lindsay, I think hers, she still has hers, and even though he has a big Christmas stocking, a regular one like her other children now have, the little red one she tucks inside of her Christmas stocking, and that's how he stays through the Christmas season. His little red Christmas stocking is tucked inside of hers. And
On the little bit lighter side of things, I cry at basketball games when we're winning. So whether it be sad times or happy times,
it's life. You were asking about generationally. Steve's grandmother immigrated to the U.S. in the early part of the century, and she had 2 stillborn boys in Europe before she immigrated. And to the day she died, she talked about her boys that she left behind. And I've often thought about how hard it was for her. Today I think about that. At the time when she was still alive and talked about it, it didn't mean much to me. But today I've often thought about how hard it must have been for her to bury those boys and then to immigrate to the United States and know that she would never be near her boys ever again. And it broke her heart back then, even though she had to be stoic and go on and work on the farm fields and do everything that was expected of her, but her heartache never, ever went away.
Yeah, stillbirth certainly isn't anything new. We wish we could make it something that was totally in our past and everybody's past. But at this point, I guess...
it is who we are.
Yeah, it is who we are. It's helped make us. Maybe we're better grandparents for it. We don't know for sure. We'll never know that because it was our first, and of course we love all of our subsequent grandchildren. So there has to be some good somewhere in that. I would like to think that we would have been as good a grandparents without having to
have this experience.
Have Garrett give us that strength or that perspective of what type of grandparents we wanted to be. But nevertheless, maybe that was his mission in life, to help us. Not that I'm trying to justify losing him by any means, but
I believe that was his purpose.
Yeah.
Today, after 11 years, I can say that I think that was his purpose in our lives, and maybe it's his purpose for his life too. I hope that's the case. You mentioned support, and I think that friends and family, the support was as appropriate as it could be. I think that hospitals and care providers can do a better job than what we give. Now, I hear stories now where they do, and it's hospital by hospital, and it is nurse by nurse or doctor by doctor. It's very specific to the individual and the organization. But our hospital experience was, we felt like intruders and add-ons and a pain in the neck.
And I do think Star Legacy has certainly helped in that regard. At least the people we've been able to work with and talk to, but there is just so much more that needs to be done, and there's certainly a lot of areas around the country and really the world that have not had the experience of some of the things that Star Legacy stands for, if you will. But I have to, go on with a comment that Shauna made earlier regarding, I think the hospital people, the staff, everybody out there really wants to care. I mean, I think they simply don't have the tools and
Or the preparation.
And again, we're fighting the legal system, we're fighting the insurance companies, we're fighting the political side of it, and it isn't that any of those people are intent in they don't mean to be hurtful, but at the same time, some of the things that they have to abide by, you can't take one blanket policy and apply it to every pregnancy or to every situation. So I'm not sure how we deal with it. It's an uphill battle that we struggle with every day. And the answers aren't even the same every day. What we think one day would be the perfect fix, then as we talk with people, that isn't the perfect fix either. There's I wish I knew the perfect fix.
Yeah, we just have to be steadfast in our passion to encourage the people that can do something about it to do something about it.
Yeah. So as grandparents, I think we have to say we tried to be as strong as we possibly could for our own kids, and to some extent even mask our own hurt of losing our grandson. But so we needed support from friends, family, and whatever. But it was probably even better support for us watching them support our daughter and our son-in-law, who were obviously hurting. So, that was really one of those situations where we were almost a pass-through, and that was okay. We were a little bit of the shield, if you will.
I've lost the other topics that you mentioned.
That was about it.
You get us going and we go on, don't we?
Yeah.